You ever notice that the more you try to control everything in your life, the more it all seems to slip through your fingers? You plan every detail, imagine every scenario, try to predict every obstacle, and still, life surprises you. Not the way you wanted, the way you feared. And then you ask yourself, why does this always happen to me? There's something Neville Goddard discovered that changes everything about how we understand control, surrender, and the creation of reality. He saw that there's an invisible law operating in our lives, a law that doesn't respond to our desperate efforts, but to the internal state we carry. And here's what's remarkable. This law only reveals itself fully when you stop fighting against it and learn to surrender the right way. I'm not talking about giving up. I'm talking about something much deeper, something that can completely transform what you attract and what you experience. Neville Goddard spent decades studying the human mind and consciousness, and what he found contradicts everything we've been taught about achievement and control. He discovered that most people live their entire lives trying to force outcomes through sheer willpower, through constant effort, through gripping tighter and tighter to what they want. But here's the paradox he uncovered. The tighter you grip, the more resistance you create. The more you try to manipulate circumstances, the more you reinforce the very state of lack and fear that's creating your current reality. Think about it for a moment. When you're desperately trying to control a situation, what's the feeling underneath that desperation? It's fear. Fear that if you let go, everything will fall apart. Fear that you're not enough. Fear that life won't work out unless you micromanage every single detail. And according to Goddard's understanding of consciousness, that fear is not just an emotion you're experiencing, it's a creative force. It's literally the blueprint you're handing to reality, saying, this is what I expect, this is what I believe is true about my life. Goddard talked about something he called the state of consciousness, and this is where everything shifts. He said that your outer world is nothing more than a reflection of your inner state, not your wishes, not your hopes, not even your desperate prayers, but the state you actually embody, the feeling you live from moment to moment. Most people try to change their circumstances while remaining in the same internal state, and then they wonder why nothing changes. They want financial freedom while living in constant anxiety about money. They want love while feeling fundamentally unworthy. They want peace while clutching onto control, like it's the only thing keeping them alive. And this is where the secret reveals itself. When you surrender control, you're not giving up on your desires. You're releasing the resistance that's been blocking them. You're stepping out of the state of fear and lack, and into a completely different way of being. Now, let me tell you about something that happened in Goddard's own life that illustrates this perfectly. There was a period when he was living in New York, struggling financially, desperate to change his circumstances. He tried everything. He worked harder, he networked, he pushed and forced and exhausted himself trying to make things happen. Nothing worked. The harder he tried, the worse things got. Then one night, completely depleted, he stopped trying. Not because he gave up on his desire, but because he realized he was approaching it all wrong. Instead of trying to force the external world to change, he did something radical. He assumed the feeling of already having what he desired. Not as a technique, not as a manipulation, but as a state of being. He laid in bed that night and imagined, with complete surrender to the feeling, that his life was already the way he wanted it to be. He didn't try to figure out how it would happen. He didn't strategize or plan. He simply felt it as real, and then he let it go. Within weeks, circumstances shifted in ways he never could have orchestrated through control. Opportunities appeared. Connections happened. Money flowed. But here's what's crucial. It wasn't because he used some magic trick. It was because he changed his state of consciousness. This is what most people miss about surrender. They think it means becoming passive, sitting back and waiting for life to happen to them. But Goddard's teaching is the opposite of passivity. True surrender is the most active thing you can do, because it requires you to claim your desire internally before you see any external evidence. It requires you to live from the end, to embody the state of already having what you want, even when everything around you suggests otherwise. And this is terrifying for the controlling mind, because the controlling mind only trusts what it can see, what it can manipulate, what it can force. But life doesn't work that way. Consciousness works from the inside out, not the outside in. When you try to control everything, you're operating from a fundamental misunderstanding of how creation works. You're treating yourself as separate from your desires, as someone who has to chase them down and capture them through effort. But Goddard discovered that you are not separate from what you desire. Your consciousness is the creative force itself. When you surrender control, you're not giving power away. You're actually reclaiming it, because you're recognizing that the power was never in the external manipulation. It was always in the state you choose to embody. Think about the moments in your life when things worked out effortlessly, when the job came through without you forcing it, when the relationship blossomed naturally, when the solution appeared out of nowhere. What was your state in those moments? You were probably relaxed, open, you had released the outcome, you had surrendered the how and simply trusted the what. That's not coincidence. That's the law revealing itself. Here's what happens neurologically when you surrender control. And this is where science meets Goddard's mystical insights. When you're in a state of chronic control and stress, your nervous system is in fight or flight mode. Your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for creativity and problem solving, literally goes offline. You become reactive, narrow-focused, unable to see possibilities beyond your limited perspective. But when you surrender, when you release that grip, your nervous system shifts into a parasympathetic state. Your brain opens up. You start seeing opportunities you were blind to before. Synchronicities happen, not because the universe suddenly decided to help you, but because you're finally receptive to what was always there. Goddard would say you've tuned into a different frequency of consciousness, and now you're receiving on that channel. So what does this look like practically? How do you surrender without giving up? It starts with understanding that surrender is not about the external action. It's about the internal state. You can still take action, but you take it from a place of already being fulfilled, not from a place of desperate need. You can still have goals, but you hold them lightly, knowing that the how is not your job. Your job is to embody the state of the wish fulfilled, to live from the feeling of already having what you desire, and then let life orchestrate the details in ways your controlling mind never could. This requires daily practice because your default pattern is control. Every morning, before you jump into the day's problems, spend time feeling the reality you want as if it's already here. Not visualizing from a distance, but feeling it in your body, in your nervous system. Then release it, let it go. Trust that the state you've impressed upon consciousness is now working itself out in your external world. The secret life reveals itself when you stop trying to write every page of the story and instead become the author who trusts the narrative to unfold. When you stop gripping and start receiving. When you recognize that control is the illusion and surrender is the doorway to everything you've been fighting for. This isn't about positive thinking or wishful hoping. This is about understanding the fundamental nature of consciousness and how it creates reality. Neville Goddard spent his life teaching this, and the people who truly understood him didn't just change their circumstances, they transformed their entire experience of being alive. So I want you to ask yourself right now, what are you trying to control? What are you gripping so tightly that you've cut off the circulation to your own life? And what would happen if you surrendered it? Not into the void, but into the creative power of your own consciousness. Try it. Not as a test, but as an experiment in living differently. Embody the state of already having what you desire, feel it as real, and then release the how. Watch what life reveals when you finally get out of your own way.